Hello everybody, Richard from SharpshootingUK here. Lovely crisp winter morning. I'm here to talk to you about the new Recon G2. Hottest scope in the world, really. I've been assessing this for a few months compared to the relevant competition both in America and Europe, and I'm here to inform you of my findings as to how good a proposition this Recon G2 is from Valdada. So, quick recap. Those of you who are aware of my scope reviews and such like will know that in Europe, £2,000, I start to recommend the 40mm IORs, 40mm tubed IORs. Now they're a bit more money in the States, but over here there are various excellent mid 1000s options, like for example the Delta Striker. That's £1,400 over here. You've got the Athlon Kronos here, which is not a bad shout, and it's available in MOA. That is under £2,000. And then when you get to £2,000, first one you hit is the IOR RECON 4 to 28. I have long recommended this because it is, well, it's outstanding. The other thing with it is that it suits the hybrid rifle that's so popular these days. A rifle that could go stalking at on one day at 4 mag, you know, at dusk or dawn or whatever, on a reasonably compact rifle, and then be used for playing at 1,000 yards at the weekend on the same rifle. And there's a lot of those compromise rifles about, and here you've got a full-on tactical scope that in the flesh is not enormous, so it's very, very popular. After that you then go to the 5.8 to 40 Crusader from IOR, which is a big piece of kit, and you know that's never going to be very handy in any way, but you know, in any compact sort of sense. But the Recon 4 to 28 has become a bit of a classic in that hybrid role. And then of course, you know, if you want to just use it out and out on a you know, a Shaytak or a 50 or whatever, it'll do that duty as well. A really useful scope, and I've been recommending it for some years now. The people who bring these into the States are called Valdada, and they're a big company in Texas. They've got an excellent reputation, and they've been doing IOR for a long time. Now, politics aside, guys, what's happened is that company have spec'd their own scope. They are making their own scope. So you have an unknown brand in that this is the first scope of their ongoing project that's now happening and exciting. It's an unknown brand. Yes, it is. It's not an IOR. But it is made by a company who know the industry inside out, have got their fingers in all the relevant pies, know all the relevant people and factories, and have a great reputation. So I am not concerned about that one bit in an age where it's getting to be well known that relatively new companies can approach a Japanese factory who make all of the top scopes for, you know, Night Force and, you know, Nikon and, you know, Bushnell and whoever, and say, here's our recipe, make this for us. They then put less money on the top and you get a better scope for your money. I mean, I'm looking at one here, Delta. New company, no one had heard of them 10 years ago. They say to the top company in Japan who make all the scopes, well, let's be clear about this, guys, you know, these top manufacturers, they don't make scopes. They have a factory, and there's only a few in the world, make it for them according to their recipe, but you pay more for the name. So here's Delta. They come along and they say, right, we want the very best scope you can make. You pay a lot less for the name, because they're less well established, and that means the end user gets a better scope. Perfect tracking, excellent glass, along with the lines of the, you know, what your premium well-known brands would put in, say, a £3,500 scope. You get that in a £1,500 scope. So it's known these days that people can make their own scopes from the main factories in the world with their own recipe. So Valdada have seen the advantages of the 40mm tube from their dealings with IOR. They have taken all of their experience and they've made a scope similar in its function to the Recon. So compact, short, very strong, very capable 40mm tube. So it's a tactical dialer, but it's not massive physically like a Crusader or whatever. So it makes it just a bit more versatile. Now, what's happened here is it's the only non-IOR 40mm dialer. I know there are some other 40mm scopes out there, but they're doing different things. So what we've got here is this large tube size. Now, what Valdada have done here is they've used that extra real estate to add more adjustment range. I've said it before, there are some mutually exclusive design constraints when you're building a scope, and you say, right, I want X amount of field of view, X amount of adjustment range, X amount of mag range, and you stir the pot and that's that. And you can't have a foot of eye relief and world-beating field of view and a 10 times mag range. Something has to give, and you have to prioritize that in your design. So what they've done here is they've said, right, we want a world first 150 minutes of vertical adjustment in this thing. And they have been able, because of the 40mm tube, to deliver that, and that makes the scope completely unique. So that's one of the headlines with this model. We've got 150 minutes of adjustment, which is going to help you get right out there. And with the growing trend of past a mile shooting, all the adjustment range available is useful. The adjustment range is, the mag range is 4.8 to 30. So we're along the lines of the modern trend for 4 and a bit to 30 mag range, which is high mag for long range, low enough to be versatile. It's very useful, infinitely better than a 5 to 25, and infinitely better than the old-fashioned 4 times mag range 6 to 24s. We've got a lot more glass from money there, so that's all in line with where it needs to be. Now, what's interesting next about this G2 is that normally when a company approaches one of the scope manufacturing factories, you use their glass, and the top Japanese glass is comparable with the best available on the planet, so that's what you do. What Valdada have done, which appears to be a first, is insisted in more detail on the spec of the glass, and what they've got is that shot European glass in all the internal lenses, but they've decided to go with a Japanese final objective and ocular. So I don't know how many glass lenses you're talking about. I think it's 13, 14, and you've got 2 that are Japanese, and all the rest are shot. If we were to talk generally about glass characteristics, if we were to look at the IORs, what you would say is that they are not immediately white and bright and very blue in their colour. They are, I've described this before in various reviews about the IORs, they're like shooting clays with the shotgun, but with clay lenses on, like a yellower tint, and that gives you a contrasty finish, a contrasty tint, and that enables you to see in poor light, even though initially they're not immediately as bright and impressive in a way. But when you get to know that darker tint, it starts to make a lot of sense. On the flip side, you've got your more stereotypical Japanese glass, which is what I call white and bright, almost to a fault, just like the IOR glass might be seen as perhaps a shade too dark, too tinted. The Japanese glass would be so white, so, well, you're getting towards washed out. and that doesn't cut through haze as much, but you've got killer resolution and perceived impressive first impression. Wow, look at how bright that is. And really what you're looking for perfection is that middle balance where you've got warm colors, punchy contrast, enough filtering to cut through glare and haze and to pull the image out of the shadows, but without it being too dark. And that was my immediate impression on looking at this G2 from Valdada versus the rest of the premium scopes in the world, and the various different ways that they skin the cat optically. I think that the recipe, the optical recipe used here, is absolutely masterful. So what that boils down to, troops, is compared to the Recon, which is sharp as hell, okay, compared to that, you have got, in this scope, the G2, you have got significantly more resolution at max mag. This thing is sharp like a crazy thing. And resolution is always useful. It's not everything by a long shot, but it is a kind of bottom line. And we've got more resolution at the top. End of story. That is admirable, because the Recon is sharp as hell. So that puts you in the top handful, single handful of scopes on the planet. So we've landed with a bang here. The balance of the image generally is superlative with regard to that mix I was just describing of your, let's call it the tint, the color cast. It's bang in the middle, just right. We've got everything that we need to cut through haze and mist and to stop the glare on snow and the like. We've got those clay shooting glasses on, but we haven't forsaken any brightness, and it is for me a new perfection in the balance of an image. Bottom line, this is a very, very sweet image, well controlled, no chromatic aberration. That purple fringing that you can get on snow and on branches, that's just ultimately controlled. The edge-to-edge sharpness is much better than the Recon. Bit of a failing on the IOR 40mm that there's this ring at the edge unless you get the diopter at the rear just right. They're sublime, but you've got to know how to tweak them. They're relatively fussy, and that is fine when you get to that super image. But if you could reduce the fussiness and keep the quality, well, I'll take that. And that's what the G2 does. It's less fussy. At the top, max mag, your eye box is less fussy, more tolerant. It is better than the Recon optically. It's better at dusk, which is useful. It really is a hell of a recipe optically. Now the downside is that I think the design price paid for the incredible 150 minutes of adjustment is that the field of view, which in the Recon is in that rarefied super alpha category, it's 10-15% wider than the run of the mill tactical scopes, not the poor ones. I'm just talking about how much it is above the average, and it is immediately impressive when you look through the scope. It's one of those things that really makes you realize you're looking through something very special, is that wow field of view. Even if you don't notice it as field of view, it gives your eye more information. It makes the image just translate in your brain, and field of view is a big deal. Now we've got here a normal field of view. It's the same within a percent of the Striker, and the Swarovski X5, for example, is in the middle there. It's fine for the class, no problem, but it isn't outstanding. Where you have got your outstanding headlines is in that adjustment range. So that's the compromise made there. Now, the sharpness is absolutely outstanding at the top. It is really, really impressive when you're zoomed in. The bottom end is good. A lot of scopes actually forsake the bottom somewhat. If you look at a PM2 5-25, very, very good at the top. I mean, it's still, despite the age of that model, it's still world class at the top. But at the bottom, it is softer and it tunnels, and you know, modern scopes can't get away with that. And this scope is as good at the bottom as it is at the top. Eye box is perfect. It doesn't roll around. You've got no tunneling. It is sharp as the day is long. Really, really well done there. So that's all in order. The RET is similar to the IORs, really, with that floating center dot, then the 1/2 mil spacing, and then off you go, and you've got some finer hashes and coarser lines, and you know, various options. But it seems to me to be in line with a modern standard. Now, don't get me wrong, RET choice is very personal, and each job that you might do might require a slightly different take on it. For example, there is a trend now towards having a less than 1/10 of a mil center dot. For example, the Delta and the Athlon, they've got this newer take on it, which is to trim that center dot down a bit. I don't think that would have gone amiss, but we're getting into the realms of personal preference, you see. And unless a manufacturer makes 15 reticles like March and Night Force, you know, you're kind of having to get what you're given. But it is a very, very good stab, and in line with the best in the world. So nothing untoward there. The IR just lights the center dot, as the IORs do, and the Deltas do, and many others. It's feasible that first focal plane would benefit from having the whole RET lit. Some people do that. Again, personal preference, not a huge deal breaker on a long range scope, but you do have illumination when you need it. What is useful is that it is in the normal location on the side of the saddle, and it has off between each of the notches, which is becoming the standard. Focus is very smooth, very nicely done. It isn't on the tube like the IOR. This is not an IOR, it's a different scope, and this has your, just because it's 40 mil, you know, it doesn't make it an IOR. So that focuses right close for the air rifle boys, and it is a shade less fussy than the IOR is, the 40mm IOR is, with its focus. It is not what I would call sloppy, where you can set it on 100 and it's okay from 50 to infinity. It is, and I don't like that, because I find I'm forever hunting, trying to tighten it up and get it bang on. I want it to be more fussy than that, so I know when to stop tweaking the thing. And again, it's somewhat personal, but I feel that the side focus on this is just about spot on. You can fine tune it, and in a couple of seconds you know that you are at the sharpest and least parallax affected position, and then you know that you've finished, and you stop. You're not forever twiddling trying to get it from to get it better. Now, the turrets, zero stop on a collar, which is becoming fairly standard. So there's an internal collar that when you're zeroed, you move it down, you do it up, and that means that is where you stop. Dead simple. Now, we have got huge spacing between clicks here. And that means if you don't have the most sublime close range vision, and a lot of folks don't, you are going to be really not struggling to see your clicks here. Now, some scopes now are so finely geared that you would literally have 3 clicks in between these. Now, I personally like this a lot. You could argue that with this width of turret he could have got 12 or 15 minutes designed into this, mil, but I think this is lovely because the clicks are nicely spaced and you can see them. Now, it's not an audible turret, but I've always felt that clicky turrets were pretty much pointless. What you do is you have your hand on it and you want to feel the clicks. And they need to be consistent in their spacing, and these are right up my street, these turrets. Now if you want the thing to go click, 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 click every time, they're not for you. They do, but they're not those tinny ones, and that doesn't bother me a bit. The key is the spacing and the consistency and the feedback through your hand, and that for me is bang on. Now, right, what we've got on the windage is, firstly, they're marked both ways. Obviously, we don't have this marked as 5 or anything. It's that way. Right is clearly marked, and this way is clearly marked. Now, I have filled these in with red because on every scope that I get, I do that. White is right, meaning red is left. And I find training on my long-range ballistic training days at SharpshootingUK that scope dialing errors with fatigue are a big problem. And anything you can do to reduce that and to give more indicators leads to less stress-driven errors. So I always say to people that painting their turret red on the left side is prudent, and I've suggested this to Valdada as something that they should do, just as I did to Delta with theirs. But this windage turret, no problemo, dead straightforward, lots of adjustment on it, nice clicks, nice spacing, easy to center. You just take these little grub screws out and center it so that it suits you. Nothing really to report. The only thing that I would say is, on scopes north of £2,000 in the UK, you tend to get some sort of way to show that where this zeros, it depends on your scope and your rail, you might zero down at the bottom. And if that's on the zero line, well, you're lucky. If you zero like this scope up at, I don't know, what's that, 15 mil or so, that means that when I now go up 10 from here, okay, so I'm now a turn up, so I've now got 11, I've got 12 mil on, I have to remember that obviously my zero stops down here, and that's physical and no problem there, but I could get twisted up as to my turns because this stalk marking here doesn't necessarily line up with the turret. So what IOR have done, and there's lots of different ways to do this, but what IOR have done is, okay, so on the IOR turret, what you can do is undo the bottom half of the turret and physically turn it down so that it then aligns correctly with the stalk markings. And that means that when you, wherever you zero in the range of the scope, and that varies with every rifle, you can then line up the bottom with 0 so that you know, in addition to your physical zero stop, your bottom out stop, you know that you which turn you're on. So I'd like to see that incorporated, but you know, a lot of scopes use this system. If you look here at the Kronos, exactly the same. If I go up a turn, I've got my physical stop, but if I go up a turn, I've got to myself keep an eye on where I am on the stalk. It is not lined up for me with any particular zero. Now this is dead easy to do, but it would be outstanding if there could be some sort of system where we can see what turn we're on. Hey, now here I have an excellent assistant. Hello, say hi, Stan.
Hello.
This is my helper. Right, you got to stand still, mate.
It's pretty cold.
Yeah, pretty cold scope.
And I'm now actually wearing only pyjamas now.
Only pyjamas?
Well, not only pyjamas, but...
You've got an excellent Christmas jumper on. All right, let's quickly show the people your Christmas jumper. All right, that is cool. Vinny, Come and stand there and we'll show them your Christmas jumper. Alright, here we go. Let's have a look at you. Oh, that is a good Christmas jumper, mate. Well done. Alright, say Merry Christmas, guys.
Merry Christmas.
Alright, good lads. Okay, so let's recap a bit here. We've got sensible mag range, modern ret, good turrets, standard premium tactical fare. What is interesting about the Recon G2 is the 40mm tube gives it unprecedented internal adjustment, which is useful. And we've got an MOA version of this and a MIL version, and availability is going to be not a problem. This scope was designed to solve supply problems that Valdada were having with the IORs. So this scope is a competitor to that, using their experience to see if they can tweak the recipe. And what they've done is they've made it sharper and clearer at the top with an excellent transmission. It really is a bit of a groundbreaker, to be honest, and a resounding success optically, definitely, with a USP of top tier adjustment range, and everything else is in line with the modern tactical alphas. There are a couple of minor tweaks that I would make personally, but then the next man will tell you that they would change something else. So it's really definitely hit the ground running, this has. Now everything in the world comes down to money. This, with the exception of field of view and maybe that turn indicator, which isn't a huge deal, is a better scope than the Recon, the IOR Recon, and that is saying something. But it all depends on the money. In America, it is cheaper than the Recon, and that is a simple decision. I would buy this over the Recon if the money were the same. And it's significantly cheaper in the States, so just get it done. Now, in Europe, it's going to be a little more than the Recon. And the question, I think, then is, do you go for the even better optics, the incredible adjustment range, or do you go for, so in that case you would buy the G2, or do you favour the more generous field of view on the IOR? And, you know, that's life. It's not for me to say which is the scope for you. It's for me to say what the different points of each of these are. The original Recon has got more field of view and perhaps slightly more squared away turrets when you're dialing a very, very, very long way, multiple turns. Now, think how far 10mm gets you on a turn in a modern rifle. 30 plus minutes, I mean, you're out a long way. But if you are going to 2,500 meters, it is feasible that you could get your turns mixed up without careful labeling. That is all I can find fault with on this Recon G2. So in the UK, I would buy it over a lot of the £2,500 options, which is where it looks to be ending up. It's not going to be, you know, Night Force Beast money and such like £3,500 and all that silliness. It's going to be somewhere between the sort of £2,500 mark, which makes it a bit more than the Recon and, you know, the sort of PM2 5 to 25 and things like that. It is absolutely a contender for your money and should be considered very strongly. 150 minutes, modern ret, really good turrets, and frankly just about the best glass ever made, with a small compromise made on field of view, not below average but average, but everything else is 11 out of 10. It really is very sharp. I suppose that some of the people who buy Recons in Europe are using them, believe it or not, at low mag sometimes they'll shoot long range at the weekend with them, but they're often stalking with them, believe it or not, or shooting from high seats and such like. So I can say fairly categorically that the Recon G2 would be better for that, because it is better at dusk. The optical recipe does seem to work a bit better in low light. So yeah, it is absolutely a contender, this G2, and this recipe being used by Valdada, where they've got this shot glass in the middle and the Japanese ED glass at the ends, is really magic, and I'm extremely excited about where this project may go with other models. So yeah, very, very hot scope this. It isn't perfect in every way. There is never going to be a scope that is. There is always a compromise somewhere, and what these guys have done is gone for mega adjustment range. I mean, there's nothing anywhere near it. Ridiculous resolution, very, very, very progressive and squared away colour balance, with no flaws, no mistakes made anywhere in the whole package. Now, these in America are from Valdada. Everybody knows them. In Europe, they're coming in through Optics Warehouse. Again, everybody in Europe knows them, and they will offer their excellent service with regard to things like the scope out guarantee. If you don't like it, send it back, and they'll sort you out with something else. And you've got 60 days to think about that. If it breaks, you're going to be sorted, but it ain't going to break, guys. These have been run in the States on some very big rigs, really hammered, long range. I think you'll find that this is going to be regarded as rock solid reliability-wise. I can't say that categorically because it's a new piece of kit, but the people who make these, or who have spec'd them and then have them designed, have endeavoured to make the best scope that is currently available on the planet. A company that routinely deal in sniper systems and the very best that is available. When they spec a scope, they're not going to mess you about, and they've got a lot to prove. And Valdada here have not compromised on the slightest detail. They wanted the highest quality internal fittings, the very, very best, money no object, and the proof is in the pudding, and this pudding tastes real good, guys. It is definitely a contender for your money in that alpha bracket. Now, I don't mess about with the tracking. I don't shoot any groups. I do it all optically. So there's no room for error. Clamped down, optical calibrated cards, and away we go. Now, when people do a box, they normally go up 10 minutes, right down, round, and hope it comes back to zero. That's nowhere near good enough. What separates the men from the boys with tracking is simply this. When you cram the scope against the stops of windage, right up against left or right till it stops, will it still then go vertically? What happens in more scopes than you would believe is when you're up against the stops for left, the next, say, 3 minutes of up go nowhere. Dead clicks. Imagine the carnage when that happens in the field. And then you go up one more click and suddenly the ret will bounce diagonally 10 minutes. It's shocking. And you essentially, with many scopes, need to keep off the edges. What I do find is that you dial 20 minutes and the scope dials 20 minutes. And the return to zero tends to be good. But what separates the men from the boys is, can you cram it against the corners and it still work? So here's what happens with the Recon. So the IOR is essentially perfect. You can certainly put it right up against the edges and zero dead clicks in all the corners and it will dial no problemo. The Striker can do that. It's impressive how the best scopes now, how good they are. the days of, you know, your raggedy old Leopold, you dial 30 minutes and it does 28.5. No way. Things are much better now. What happens with the Recon G2 is the return to zero is utterly flawless in both planes from any place in the whole square, and the clicks are not affected in the corners. There's no dead clicks when you're up against any of the four extremes. It is right there. I dialed 30 mil before there was a single error, and there was a 1/10 of a mil error at 35 mil. That is as good as anything on the planet. Make no mistake about that. But yeah, those are the bottom line numbers. It's the first time I've actually given any bottom line numbers, and that's a bold shout, because people go, well, is it not perfect? Nothing is perfect. And to get a 1/10 of error past 100 minutes of adjustment is utterly outstanding. So yeah, top tier performance when it comes to tracking. Perfect RTZ, and no dead clicks in the corners, no influence of vertical on horizontal, even in extremis, and click accuracy is flawless right till the very end, which is outstanding, especially bearing in mind how much adjustment we're talking here. No one else can do this level of adjustment. So yeah, really impressive. Optical performance suffers slightly at the very extremes of the adjustment, but you see, in the Recon that happens as well. Most scopes it happens. You dial right to the bottom of the scope and the image isn't quite as nice at the edges. You get a bit more edge distortion. But this is doing that with, 50% more adjustments. So it's absolutely in line with the best scopes in the world, with various areas that are progress, and therefore I think it moves the game forward a little bit, and I think that it is a top contender. Very, very exciting product. Now, another thing that is cool about this is that it's going to be available it is available in MOA. Now, the Recon and the Crusader, many of the IORs in the UK, we have basically never seen any MOAs. Now, I know it's a bit different in America, but there have been problems with supply. This scope, you take your pick. Recon G2, please, MOA or MIL, take your pick, it gets put in the post. It's available, ready to go, either one. And that is rather exciting news. So, yeah, very cool, very cool. And obviously the RET and the turrets are matched in the modern way. You can't get away with a MIL RET and minute turrets these days. That ain't gonna fly. So yeah, no mistakes made here, guys, none at all. Only the subtlest little changes I would make, and that's a personal thing. What's important is that it is another entry into the tactical market that is certainly worth your consideration, and you won't regret buying. Now, one of the questions that I had to consider, and one of the questions I'm being most asked when I'm referring to this scope, is would you sell a Crusader to get one? And I don't quite think that that's relevant. The Crusader is a larger scope, so it can't do anything compact like this can, and there's lots of places where a slightly more compact scope works well. And moreover, you can't compare different mag ranges. And for me, 5.8 to 40 is an entirely different scope to a 30 mag scope. So I've got a Crusader, I've used it side by side with this, and they're different beasts. If I were to compare them, I would say that much the same as the Recon, you've got that difference in glass style from the IOR relatively tinted to the perhaps slightly more balanced image that the Recon G2 has got. The Crusader's got that extra field of view. The Recon G2 has got that extra adjustment range. Again, the same thing applies with the turrets between the Crusader and the Recon G2. It comes down to physical size and mag range, and they're not comparable. So I think the scope that this Recon G2 has got to beat, the best scope it's got to beat, is the IOR Recon. It easily beats other scopes that the IOR Recon already beats, as per my previous reviews. I wouldn't dream, for example, of putting a PM2 on instead of this, unless I valued that extra field of view. If I wanted the killer resolution and balance and the better ret here, and I wanted the extra adjustment range and all of that, then, you know, I would certainly run this G2. I think the scope it's got to beat is the Recon from IOR, and I think that it does that in most areas significantly. And then there are just a couple of areas where the IOR Recon nudges back a bit. So all in all, quite the price fight. It's certainly a contender. You should certainly be considering it with your tactical scope budget.